you give me the green light, Giorgio. Okay. Well, good evening and welcome to this webinar. I'm Giorgio Bartolomucci, Secretary General of the Diplomacy Festival, and I'll moderate the debate on 5G and national security. Is there any to fear? Without any doubt, an extremely hot topic. Fears regarding 5G technologies have become mainstream. 5G is not just a promising technology development, it is also a perfect stage for a new geopolitical drama, a tech war between China and the US. Well, we already discussed the rule of the game, 7 minutes each, and the second round of 3, and then possibly a question and answer session with the students of global governance that are connected with us from Tor Vergata University in Rome. Today we have the possibility to hear directly from Washington the US position. We are connected with Mr. Alexander Alden, who serves as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs. He oversees the Office of European Union and Regional Affairs and the Office of Policy and Global Issues. In this capacity, he is responsible for strengthening US-EU relations and for coordinating efforts to counter Chinese regional influence. Mr. Alden, the US administration decided to blacklist Huawei technologies on national security grounds, and more recently banned American firms from selling components and software to Huawei without prior government approval. What is now and what could be the future policy of the US government regarding this technology? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Giorgio. I want to say in Italian, grazie a tutti per l'invito a partecipare al Festival della Diplomazia. I'm very happy to be here with you today, this evening in Europe. I'm thankful that despite COVID-19 pandemic, we can still get together to discuss an important geopolitical question, quite frankly, geopolitical questions, multiple, that define our present and our future. The People's Republic of China, through authoritarian actions and cover-ups, failed to prevent the spread of COVID-19 beyond its borders, leading to a global pandemic which has killed now over 1 million people worldwide and wreaked havoc on the global economy. The clear contrast between free, democratic societies and autocratic regimes has never been more apparent. Today's topic, 5G, is a key area of transatlantic cooperation, as countries across Europe are the critical decision point in their 5G buildouts, including Italy. It is one where the US government has been engaging with European allies and partners for more than 2 years. As many of your attendees today surely know, we began a global campaign on 5G security in 2018. The stake could not be higher given a critical role 5G networks are expected to play in our lives and the economies of the future, from critical infrastructure such as transportation to electricity distribution and telemedicine. Countries, companies, citizens must be able to trust that 5G equipment, software, and service providers will not threaten national economic security, privacy, intellectual property, or, very importantly, human rights. And this trust cannot exist if suppliers subject to coercion by an authoritarian government, such as the People's Republic of China and the Chinese Communist Party in particular, which lacks an independent judiciary and rule of law to protect consumers and businesses. The Chinese Communist Party has shown a clear willingness to use big data, AI, to track and repress their own citizens in places like Hong Kong and Xinjiang. And we want to be careful about extending their reach. I want to shift to talking about Europe a little bit, where I had the, would like to say, privilege to travel recently, because these days traveling to Europe for many, or traveling around the world, has become not a common thing, but quite a privilege. So I recently joined Undersecretary for Economic Growth, Energy and Environmental Affairs, Keith Kroc, on Brussels stop of his 10-city Europe trip, where 5G was at top of his agenda. Undersecretary Kroc returned to the region again last week. We find that across Europe, countries are waking up to the risk of untrusted vendors in 5G networks. We've seen the recent decision in the UK to ban Huawei by 2027. For example, that's a good indicator of a momentum that is building up in many other countries as well. Italy is also in a crucial phase of 5G. We ask the Italian government to thoroughly consider the threats to its national security, its democracy, and its citizens' privacy from data being transmitted across a network that is accessible to the Chinese Communist Party without any checks and balances. We applaud the security measures and oversight of the Golden Power Committee, which has outlined important guidelines for use of Huawei equipment. We also commend the decision that the Italian government has recently made to veto a contract between Fastweb and Huawei. Nevertheless, we encourage Italy to go a step further and ban untrusted vendors outright. We would welcome Italy joining the 5G Clean Path initiatives, indicating our mutual commitment to safeguarding the security of 5G telecommunications in our diplomatic facilities at home and abroad. I want to shift a bit now to discuss the role of the European Union, which, as you indicated in the introduction, is part of my portfolio, the US-EU relations. And I'd like to touch upon on how important the EU work has been so far. The EU took a great step forward last January with its 5G security, cybersecurity toolbox, which sets out measures to mitigate the risks identified in the EU coordinated risk assessment, such as exclusion of high-risk suppliers from critical and sensitive parts of 5G networks, including the radio access network. Member states, including Italy, are adopting the toolbox of measures. A July interim report cited progress on building regulatory frameworks for 5G and strengthening network security and resiliency requirements for mobile operators. However, it is also called for urgent steps to reduce dependency on high-risk suppliers, to introduce foreign direct investment screening mechanisms in member states which currently lack them, and to apply these mechanisms to investments potentially affecting the whole 5G value chain. We welcome the European Council conclusions from earlier this month that called on member states to make full use of 5G cybersecurity toolbox. The United States is also urging EU member states to implement the toolbox recommendation by adopting strong, risk-based security measures that exclude untrusted suppliers from all parts of their 5G networks. I would like to now emphasize some of the initiatives that we have been taking from the US government perspective. To date, the United States has concluded 12 joint declarations on 5G security, 11 of which have been with European countries, which is an important testament to the robust transatlantic cooperation in this space. The MOUs endorse the Prague protocols and recognize the importance of a rigorous security review of vendors along key criteria. Concluding additional declarations with allies and like-minded countries remains a top priority for the Department of State and the National Security Council. On April 29th, Secretary Pompeo has announced that the Department of State will require a 5G clean path to ensure that our overseas diplomatic facilities have a secure end-to-end communication path on 5G standalone networks that does not use any services from any untrusted vendors. Given the focus on standalone networks, this is a statement of intent for the future to help build momentum for decisions being made now. It is aligned with our broader 5G security campaign. Again, the 5G Clean Path initiative complements the work done by the EU member states developing the EU 5G cybersecurity toolbox for designing, constructing, and administering 5G infrastructure. We encourage other countries, businesses, organizations to join us in calling for 5G Clean Path for their own facilities in third countries to protect sensitive information and intellectual property. And I'd like to pivot to some concluding remarks here to emphasize a point Secretary Pompeo made in his virtual remarks at the second Prague 5G Security Conference last month. Technology must advance freedom. It must advance freedom, our shared values, and mutual interest in the international free and open order that we have worked together as a transatlantic community to create, and which unfortunately is increasingly threatened by authoritarian governments. Finally, I want to underscore that the United States and Europe are converging on an understanding of how Chinese government exercises global malign influence to advance its geopolitical and geoeconomic ambitions. This is evident with regard to not only 5G, but across the critical and emerging technology landscape. It has created an urgent need to examine our relationship with, and especially our dependencies on, the People's Republic of China. The new US-EU dialogue on China, launched by Secretary Pompeo and High Representative Borrell just last week, will be an opportunity to discuss our shared challenges vis-a-vis the PRC and think about ways to strengthen the transatlantic partnership. Back in July, Secretary Pompeo called this, quote, the transatlantic awakening to the China challenge, end quote. I look forward to the discussion today on how we can foster greater transatlantic cooperation on 5G and other issues. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. And remind me that when you will have the second round, I would like to ask you your opinion about what some analysts, US analysts and companies have observed, that limiting US tech exports to Chinese companies like Huawei could eventually backfire, and limiting the export of US technology will reduce US output and jobs. This is a question that I will pose to you later. Now, before we go into the geopolitical discussion, for the benefit of our students, let's try to understand, with the help of an expert, what makes the 5G technology different and more efficient, but critical and, as many say, risky. We have with us Andrea Zapparoli Manzoni, that since 2011 he started an in-depth analysis of national and international serious cyber attacks, classifying more than 6,500 attacks as for January 2017. In the same year, he joined Clusit as a director and member of the board. He's connected with us from Dubai, where he works for a cyber defense company. Andrea, today, IT systems are extremely complex. Many of these systems are built with parts supplied by many hardware and software vendors. Do you think that in principle, this may create multiple possible entry points for malicious attacks, data leaks, through backdoors that can be exploited to gain full control of the device? And last question, US and European technological industries are really very far behind the Chinese one? The floor is yours. The microphone, Andrea. Microphone. We can't hear you. We cannot hear you.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. So, yes, thanks again, Giorgio, for the question. I don't know how many days you guys have for the answers, because this is really a complicated subject. So let me start from a point of view which is not really related to my cybersecurity expertise. What we are talking about when we talk about 5G, it's a huge, immensely huge, actually, infrastructure, which is made of hundreds of thousands of pieces. It's not like a one single box that you put somewhere and does a job. It's an incredibly complex ecosystem that will go and already goes from the single individual handheld mobile device up to carrier grade, incredibly complicated infrastructures and technologies and machines. And then there's all the IoT part and so on and so on. So when we say 5G, we must keep in mind that this is a change that will modify everything in our societies in terms of outcomes. So it's not the 5G in itself, but it's everything that will be habilitated and that will become possible when 5G is introduced on a wider enough scale. So, and we are not there yet, but we will see it in the next few years. So by 2025 or 26, I expect the world to change substantially because of the introduction of 5G and the adoption of 5G. So we must keep this in mind. This said, when you say, could this complexity introduce backdoors and so on? Well, actually, these backdoors are already everywhere. And this is basically what I research with my team, with my company. We research vulnerabilities in hardware and software systems that range from the more common operating systems to the most exotic devices. And these vulnerabilities are everywhere. Many more than people think, actually, because most of them are not known publicly. So I would say that, just to give you an example of the situation, over 100 vulnerabilities that we study, probably 5 become public. So this is the ratio. And most of the others are used by state and non-state actors for their purposes every day while we are speaking now. So, of course, the introduction of such a change as 5G connectivity will give more opportunities for cyber attacks. And this will happen for several reasons. The first reason is that 5G networks are software-defined networks. So what will be attacked will mainly be the software part of this infrastructure, which until now, if we are talking about communication infrastructures, was possible, but not very easy to do, and therefore other attack vectors were preferred. So attacking 3G or 4G network, for example, or a core network of a telco is possible. And some countries have the capability of doing it, and they are doing it every day. But it's very expensive and quite hard. But with 5G, we are like broadening the spectrum of actors that will have the capabilities of attacking the system, because it's mainly software-defined technology, and software usually is easier to hack than hardware. The second reason why the introduction of 5G will increase the attack surface is because 5G will allow things that now are not even thinkable, to such a scale that the attack surface itself by nature will grow exponentially. So there are things nowadays that you simply cannot do that will be normal with 5G because of the performances of this network and because of their features. And the number of connected devices also will soar incredibly in terms of tens or hundreds of billions because of that. Consider, for example, that 5G will habilitate most probably the diffusion of autonomous vehicles. So all of a sudden you will have at first millions, and then tens of millions, and then hundreds of millions of autonomous vehicles which are all connected to the 5G network, and probably will be somehow hackable. Then the other problem that I see is that the supply chain for this enormous infrastructure is extremely fragmented and it's not monitored. So there is no tracking in the supply chain of electronics, as we have for food, for example, or for other things like dangerous chemicals, whatever. There are many, many examples of supply chain tracking mechanisms, but with electronics, this doesn't happen at all. When you integrate a product, sometimes you don't even know what kind of chips you have put inside. I mean, you don't know where they come from, or barely, you know. So, and nobody is really able to analyze in details all these electronic parts, because the time to market, the speed of the development of new products is so high that when you start testing a device, it's already out of sale. So also economically, to monitor and test these devices properly is almost impossible task. We can concentrate on a few very critical devices or families of devices, but everything that is spread in millions or hundreds of millions of pieces, when it is already sold, I mean, to patch it or to fix it if there is a vulnerability becomes almost impossible. So this is already happening, actually. but it will definitely have a greater impact in the next months and years. And then another thing that I see is that although I understand the economic warfare and the cyber diplomatic issues at stake, focusing on only one major or a few major producers could be counterproductive also from a cybersecurity point of view. I would say that what we need to do is to set up independent labs that can test in a neutral way all solutions from all vendors, because most of the vulnerabilities and the so-called backdoors are unintended, but still they can be exploited, and still they can create a lot of damage if exploited. Some of them are not, but the percentage I would say is like 9 unintended to 1 intended. So even if there is no malice in the introduction of these vulnerabilities and backdoors, someone should test in a neutral way all products in the same way, following the same standards, and then issuing the
Andrea,
same.
you have a minute. You have a minute to complete.
Yeah. So basically, I think that from a cybersecurity point of view, but let me put it into a systemic perspective. So, and also a society level issue, because cyber threats are like the pandemic. It's a common good that is at stake, right? So it's the health of our societies that is at stake. So from this point of view, there are 2 issues here. First of all, a standardization of testing and certifications. And this should apply to all vendors independently from their origin. Because if you properly test something, you will find the problems. And then you can apply fines, you can do whatever you want. But preemptively blocking some big player from acting on this market is probably not helping. And it's because of many reasons. Now we don't have time to discuss, maybe later in the second round. And the second thing that we must do, and I know this is, sounds a little bit utopic, is that we must keep the producers liable for the defects of their products, which nowadays is not happening. This is a huge, tremendously dangerous anomaly that only applies to ICT. If you build cars and you have a defect and people die or have accidents for that, the maker will pay. But if you have a bug in a software or in a hardware system, and this creates a huge damage, maybe even worldwide, the producer doesn't pay a cent. Because
Andrea, I'll have to ask you to continue this in the second round.
Sure.
Because now I would like to go on in the program and ask to an Italian diplomat, Councillor Fabio Rugge, that holds a double hat. He's the head of the office in charge for NATO and security and political military issues at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also head of the ISPI Center on Cybersecurity in partnership with Leonardo. Fabio, could you give us your opinion, especially as the observer in the ISPI Center, about the battle going on about security?
Yes, thank you, Giorgio, and thank you to all the speakers before me and after me and the guests. I see there are so many young people. It's really a pleasure and a demonstration that your idea, Giorgio, of the Festival of Diplomacy is a good one and alive and kicking, notwithstanding the pandemics. I will start very briefly quoting what my friend Adriano Soi writes today on Formiche. And he discussed the eruptions of violence that were around Italy yesterday and the day before that. And I think he makes a very good observation, because he says what is missing and what probably justifies, well, not maybe doesn't justify, but explains the violence of these days is the fact that what appears to be missing is anticipation. And anticipation is exactly what we need to do sound security policies. And I think this is a very sound observation. And I think that this applies also to 5G. We wrote a dossier at ISPI just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, on 5G. And the question that we try to answer is, why, if 5G is so dangerous, so relevant and therefore so dangerous, why is it banning dangerous technology so contentious? Because it's really difficult to explain, if you will. Very briefly, and I'm thinking mostly to the students that are listening to us, what are the risks of 5G? Because it's essential that we are very clear. I would say at least 4. The first one, the espionage, stealing of intellectual property, stealing of issues that are of national security relevance, of defense and security, that kind of thing. The second risk, sabotage, the risk that a foreign provider might use is control of the network to sabotage our critical infrastructure, to make a denial of service, to divert traffic, or maybe to forge data which is essential for artificial intelligence, and which will be increasingly important for artificial intelligence. And you pollute that data, you create a damage to the artificial intelligence that is, and the algorithm that are working on the data. So the third risk is more subtle, if you will. It's the risk of profiling of users that are connected to the 5G network. Profiling, which then might be used for cyber-enabled information warfare, to modify the perceptions, to influence the public opinion, to conduct a psychological operation in time of crisis, and steer the debate, the political debate around issues that are of interest of foreign powers. Now, all this is creating a decoupling of the ICT supply chain at the global level. The point is, even though we could trust, even if we could trust Chinese vendors to provide 5G technology to the European continent, the idea is that in any case that would probably be problematic, and I'll tell you why. Because data is the most essential, one of the most essential component of is value, is oil, is the oil of the 21st century. Development in computing power, big data, the IoT, the cyber-enabled information warfare, cyber power more in general, is an essential component of sovereignty in the 21st century, right? So providing an access to the data of our citizens without ensuring that that data is protected against foreign powers eardropping on our citizens is by definition providing fuel and data to a foreign power, which is in any case, even if that foreign power is the most legit one, in any case might prove to be problematic. So why is it so difficult, if those are the threats and the challenges that we are facing, why is it so difficult to have a clear line on 5G? I guess it is mostly an issue of awareness, and this is understandable. It's troublesome, it's worrisome, but it is understandable. It is understandable for 3 reasons. The first one being the cyber domain is a domain of ambiguity. You don't know who's attacking you, you don't know why you're under attack. You don't know whether you are under attack or you're just a proxy of a much larger campaign. The problem of attribution, all these issues are complicating tremendously the understanding of the cyber domain. So this is the first reason. The second reason is that we are in the midst of one of the greatest revolutions in human history. And there is an issue of, a cognitive issue, a cultural issue. Are we really understanding what is happening to us? Our model of approach is technology driven, not policy driven. We are not designing our future. We are looking at technology and seeing how the technology is designing our future. Yeah, and this, of course, makes it more difficult to appreciate the challenges that stem from cyberspace. The third reason, and I conclude with this, Giorgio, is the one which I started with, and Professor Soy article today. The issue is a culture of security. I mean, what is probably missing, and even in Italy with the very peculiar history that we have, but what is probably missing is the idea that we need a culture of security. We need to anticipate issues. We need to look at the long term. And because security is instrumental in the enjoyment of any other value, any other good that we have. Because without security, you can do really nothing. So, and my last observation is the following. Stability in cyberspace is, of course, essential. We see it with the discussion of 5G, but we have seen it in so many other contexts in the last 20, 30 years. So my question is, how come, if stability of cyberspace is so important, how come this is not a political issue? We have a huge political security issue, but there is no political thinking. And political thinking will be really necessary because political thinking attributes values. Yeah. Without political thinking, you are not aware of where the values are. Yeah. Political thinking shape values. And if we are in the midst of a great power competition where technological superiority, cyber superiority are so essential, well, then you need to mobilize people, mobilize the Western community to defend Western democracies, liberal democracies against the threats that might stem from autocratic regime. And if you need to do that, then you need values. So the lack of political thinking, the lack of awareness in our political debate about the threat of 5G is really the symptom of a much larger issue, in my opinion. And I would really try and focus on that. This is what we're trying to do at ISPI, by the way. And so thank you so much, Giorgio, for allowing me these few minutes, because I think this discussion is very useful, timely, and hopefully fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio. And I think that you have also the couple of teams that will be part of the questions. One has to do with the threats, and the other one is what Shohana Zuboff called the capitalism of surveillance. And I think that these are a very important issue that I leave after for the discussion. But now, of course, every time we talk about 5G, we think about China. And we have with us Romeo Orlandi, that is an economist and a sinologist. He's president of the Asia Observatory, a think tank specializing in research on markets and countries in the Far East. Dr. Orlandi, do you think that 5G technology may give to the Chinese government not only an economical, but also a political leadership in the Far East and Africa?
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Alder, for your opening remarks from Washington. The answer to your question, Giorgio, is yes. 5G is a tool. 5G is an ambition for China to extend its reach in different countries. It's more or less what China did with bilateral loans, with construction of infrastructures. You can decline, you can extend the meaning of this collaboration into friendship, dominance. Of course, when it comes to surveillance, China is second to none. But now it is to be seen if China is simply filling a gap, a vacuum, mainly in countries, African countries, where after decolonialism and after the end of the Cold War, there was a gap to be filled, and China intervened with the strength of its magnitude, which is essential in bilateral negotiations. So of course, that is a tool, that is an instrument, that is something that China is using to expand its reach in the world, mainly in countries like the emerging countries or African, South American countries, having less minor leverages negotiations compared to the US or Europe. Allow me to say that 5G is also one of the stronghold or mainstay of the new China that President Xi Jinping is trying to build. These days, we saw the opening of the plenum of the Central Committee of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, which probably will give birth to a new China envisaged for the year 2035, so 15 years from now. We can say that 5G is one of the components of this new China, which is trying to progressively replace, let me say, quantity with quality. A certain idea of China, the China we used to know, China as a factory of the world, China has a big powerhouse, #1 exporter in the world, invasion of Chinese products everywhere, probably will progressively consign to history. China has a magnet for foreign investments. China has a final destination of investment. China, who makes a shutting down of factories all over the world, probably has already reached its climax. Now, another China will marry this China, a China based on technology, a China made in dominance of some market, China having the best and the largest foreign reserves in the world to be used for different ways. We all know that China plays a big role in the twin deficit of the US, both commercial deficit and budget, the state deficit. So the role of China is already given. The role of China is not to be conquered. Now China tries to capitalize with that, try to extend its reach. Then we don't know what is the final ambition. Some sinologists believe that China would like to simply grow pacifically and to avoid any additional or no other century of humiliation which China experienced from the Opium War to the end of World War II. Some others say that China is more aggressive, that China tries to dominate the world, and that China uses 5G as a tool. Actually, I don't know the answer. Probably nobody knows for sure. What I can possibly say is even if the first ambition of China, what President Xi Jinping and the predecessor called the peaceful rise of China, the win-win situation that China imposes all over the world, might be true. Even in that case, even in the best case scenario, China is objectively harmful to the rest of the world, even if competition, simply competition, is put in place. The magnitude, the ambition, the pride of that country objectively creates problem in a world which was not used to consider China as an element of negotiation to the highest level. The reality between the example of 5G is that China is no longer the humble China we used to see. President Xi Jinping from this point is quite different from Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China, who projected China as an humble actor of the international arena, up to the point that China could flex the muscles to prove its might. And this is what we are witnessing in South China Sea, or with the Belt and Road Initiative. They show different approach to a new foreign policy. I mean, more, let's say, peaceful for the Belt and Road Initiative, which is one of the epitome of globalization. It shows that to exchange goods at the frontier is much better than to exchange bullets. But we are witnessing on the other side, in the South Pacific Sea, a different China, an assertive China, building rocks, lighthouse, airports, and that of course disturbs automatically the so-called Pax Americana, which came out from the asset of the World War II. So the situation is rapidly changing. What is new from China is that President Xi Jinping, with this research of new China, prosperous China.
Romeo, you have 1 minute to close.
Okay. What President Xi Jinping is trying to do is to accelerate the rise of this new China. And this automatically put China in contradiction with an old order. And within this framework, the battle for the supremacy in the 5G and all the arguments we see in the press and the political declaration is part of this picture.
Well, thank you very much for your analysis. Very, very precise, I think. Now, compared to the US, Europe is following a different and more articulated and cautious path. Somebody thinks that a stronger role for Europe could be the best way of mitigating the effect of US-China technological rivalry. To discuss this opinion and this thesis, we have with us Christian Heidelbrink from the Center for Global Studies of Bonn, and Germano Dottori, Professor of Strategic Studies at the Luis University in Rome. First, I'll pass the floor to Christian Heidelbrink, who is heading the Bonn Shift Monitor, which examines the changes in international power structures after the turn of the millennium. She's also co-author of the study Geopolitics and the Global Race for 5G. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Today, our issue is 5G and national security. Is there anything to fear? So when I first heard about the issue, I was quite lost. Where to start? Such a huge topic. Thankfully, Mr. Bartolomucci asked me to start with my experiences on researching 5G with regard to state cyber power. So in my view, as an international relations scholar, there is of course no easy approach to study this issue. So the alarm bells are ringing when easy answers are presented in relation to 5G security and power. In my view, there are at least 5 central dimensions of concern attached to 5G and security. Technical security, military, political, economic, and normative. And I hope this will be of help for the students which are joining us today. So these 5 dimensions are inherently interconnected. And this is also what the European debate is about. Still, these 5 dimensions are useful to reveal the complexity of security issues. So from a political scientist view, the technical domain is the most challenging. So thank you, Andrea, for joining us today and explaining some technical issues here. So what is the result? The result is that this dimension is neglected in research, which also means neglecting complexity. Let me break it down for you. When researching 5G, I realized that many writings did not specify how exactly Huawei technology entails threats like access points for espionage. Some papers did not even try to specify the relationship between hardware and software, vendors and carriers, backdoors and encryption. This does not only bias public debates, but also may create a false sense of security by believing that if Chinese equipment is banned from the 5G rollout, the network will be secure of cybersecurity threats. Beyond that, the technical aspects also have military security implications as sensitive data is transferred over these networks. Mr. Alden put it right as a first speaker today. So as we all know, the decision of whether or not to include Huawei has also caused rifts between the US and the European transatlantic partners. This may have real-world consequences on intelligence sharing and military cooperation in NATO. Technical aspects also have economic implications because we are talking about $1 billion business. In this $1 billion business, the 5G race is about gaining the first mover advantage. This has long-term effects on international reputation, norm shaping, and economic gains of companies and states alike. It also leads to the normative dimension, which is about the power to promote preferred norms and values around the use of emerging technologies. This was a quick and certainly non-exhaustive walkthrough of the 5 security dimensions: the technical, military, political, economic, and normative implications of 5G. All of them have an impact on national security, but they also affect our everyday lives. In political science, we call this a hyper-securitized issue. In hyper-securitized threat scenarios, virtually all referent objects, like the state, the economy, or you and me, are affected at the same time. The complexity of hypersecuritization is yet hardly represented in public or political debates, be it in Europe or in the US or beyond. What we find instead are repeated geopolitical discussions. Of course, the power issue is at hand here. As you heard, 5G has significant effects on a country's hard power. I mean the capacities to coerce others by political, economic, or military means. As well on a country's soft power, which is about the power to attract and co-opt others. When these power anxieties come together, like in 5G discussions, they often produce fatal black and white thinking. In turn, this may lead to misconceptions about potential dangers, actors' responsibilities, and appropriate security measures. Let me come to my last point by repeating that researching 5G is not an easy task. Besides the complexity of the issue, the label national security creates certain barriers. In the aftermath of our study, Geopolitics and the Global Race for 5G, we aimed at a follow-up study focusing on the perspective of network operators. Unfortunately, our request was declined by virtually all network operators. They answered that this was a too sensitive issue. They also expressed concerns that such research could compromise their position on the ongoing decision-making process. So to put in a nutshell, my research experiences about 5G are its complexity is too often oversimplified, and the label national security severely cuts down the chances for a badly needed, well-informed debate. And I'm so happy that we were having this well-informed debate today with so many great experts. So, okay, that's enough for me for the moment, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christian. You were perfectly on time. And now we pass the floor to Germano Dottori, that is currently scientific advisor of Limes, Italian Geopolitical Review, and co-chair of strategic studies at the Lewis University. Professor Dottori, what I would like to know from you, what do you think about this concern on growing political, economical leadership of China in the world? And furthermore, nobody ever speaks about Russia. It is only an observer or an outsider in the tech war between China and the US. The floor is yours.
First of all, Giorgio, let me thank you for having involved me again into your Festival of Diplomacy, which is now one of the leading event in Rome's fall. And I would like also to address the topics you were referring before. First of all, which is the state of the world, because we are talking about a tech war, which is part of a broader geopolitical confrontation, which has reached the global level. As it has been already pointed out by several of the people that already interviewed here, something has changed into the behavior of the Chinese leadership. The Chinese leadership has begun to convert economic wealth and technological prowess into political and military power. And the big rivalry opposing the United States to China in this very moment is a crucial part of this comprehensive scenario I was describing just a few moments before. And Xi Jinping in China is not the China of Deng Xiaoping. There is not anymore such a thing you can label as a peaceful rise, because as a matter of fact, and it has already been described, the political reach of China is extending, and China is trying to extend its sphere of influence. And in my opinion, China has already trespassed a critical threshold, and the battle for exporting the fifth generation technology infrastructure is right about that, because those who will be able to impose his own technology to the others will enjoy not only a competitive advantage, not only some extra revenue from the sale of this technology. There will be much more at stake, because those who will possess this critical infrastructure will be able to exert a strong influence, even a conditioning power, over those who will buy this technology. In my opinion, the issue is completely strategic. Is right, I think, Mr. Zapparoli Manzoni, when he told that the problem is not connected to the security of communication. The problem is not the backdoors, because our devices are completely crowded with backdoors. The only thing you need is just to download a certain kind of applications, and there on your own device you have all the means that are required in order to transform a mobile phone into an object part of a complex intelligence system. So the problem is not there. The problem is the strategic power. The strategic power enjoyed by those who will provide the critical infrastructure. The fifth generation technology will be the backbone of the Internet of Things. There will be the technological backbone of the future smart cities. And it will be the software and the hardware connecting the complex web of systems that will manage the current life of every individual in the advanced economies. And that makes all the more political and strategic the choice about the provider and the nationality of the provider. You were telling me about Russia. Russia is not an actor of this race. Russia is a poor country. The GDP of Russia is more or less the same of Italy before COVID-19. And with an economy of the size of Italy, you can't build up a technology of this ambition and this strategic magnitude like the 5G technologies. What I wanted to say, which is very important, in my opinion, is the key issue, which is not related, as I told before, to the security of information, even if it's relevant per se in every time. The problem is this concept, which has been described in 1999 by two then colonels of the People Liberation Army, Mr. Chao Liang and Wang Zhangzui. They explained it to us that time, more than 20 years ago, that real revolution in military affairs was not the one performed by the United States incorporating a new generation of technologies into the military equipment. The real revolution in military affairs was another thing, completely different. And according to them, it consisted into the ability to transform into a military weapon every sort of civilian asset. In my opinion, the 5G technology is the technology enabling this kind of strategic concept, because once you have the infrastructure, you sell the infrastructure, you may, from remote, to change the purpose, to change the program, which allows all the system or the civilian society function properly in our society. This is why months ago, I think even a year ago, I have not enough memory about that now. Former General John Allen, in his capacity of chairman of the Brookings Institution, came to Rome and explained it to us. There were some stakeholders in the TLC technologies. He was saying, very simple, you have a choice to make between two different kinds of providers. You know who we are, even if from time to time we interfere in your business, in your political affair. You know that we respect the rule of law. We more or less share the same values. You can trust us much more than others, like the Chinese. So this is the reason why the United States is exerting very important pressures all around. It's trying to engage the transatlantic allies in order to prevent the Chinese to sell this critical technology to us. At the very moment, there is also already an alternative, and the alternative is provided not even by the US, but by two European firms, which are Ericsson.
Germano, you have 1 minute to close.
Yeah, which are, I am almost concluded. These two companies are Ericsson, the Swedish one, and the Finnish Nokia. And you may well understood that we can trust them much more because neither Sweden nor Finland are great power and have any particular ambition in conditioning the life of other European countries or even the United States. So in my opinion, the real issue is that we have to think about on which grid power we have to be dependent. And we have to avoid absolutely every kind of choice that is liable to enlarge our dependency on China. We have to make the opposite choice, the choice in the opposite direction, in my opinion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Germano. And we have the last speaker that is connected from London, Colin Campbell. And Colin is held senior leadership roles in the IT services and consumer goods industries in several companies in Europe, South America, and Asia Pacific. In 2013, he founded Digi2All, a London-based company with the core ethos to help clients get the best and the most up-to-date technology. Colin, till last year, the UK National Cybersecurity Centre was talking and was leading the way in a mitigation approach. Lately, on the contrary, this type of idea of keeping riskier vendors out of sensitive functions did not satisfy anymore the Johnson government. And the implementation of the 5G network has not been considered anymore an opportunity, but a risk to national security of the UK. My question is, what is the opinion of the British industry about this dramatic change of politics? The floor is yours.
From a mobile location, courtesy of 4G. I hope that the connection is suitable. 5G would be a better speed, but here we go on 4G. So just for some context for your listeners, the GCHQ function, the Government Communications HQ, has a long history of managing high-risk vendors in the UK telecoms market, and has managed Huawei as a high-risk vendor since 2003. So there's a long history.
We can't hear you very well now.
Here now, as a business person, I had to go and do some research around this topic, so I'm well informed. Okay, that's a shame because I really want to take part in this. I'm not sure.
No, it's okay now. It's okay.
How
it's
is that
okay.
now?
It's okay.
Okay, let's continue. So for your listeners, I would really recommend that they look at the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, the documentation that has been extremely well written by Dr. Ian Levy. And that goes back to last year, where there was some really in-depth analyses done on Huawei, but also on the design of the 5G network. So I think that the approach reading between the lines is that the start point is they don't trust any vendor. And then it's around managing the risk within the infrastructure. Now, the recent change to the sanctions from the US led the NCSC in earlier this year to change its recommendation. So your listeners will be able to see a blog post by Dr. Ian called The Future of Telecoms in the UK. And that was posted in January. The sanction that was implemented in May caused the National Cybersecurity Centre to change its security advice. And that advice was updated in June, which led to the announcement in the House of Commons by the government around removing Huawei from the infrastructure and also not procuring any new equipment. So as a business person, I have to take the advice of the National Cybersecurity Centre. They have written about it in the blogs, and I can't recommend them enough for your listeners. And they've tried to be as open as they possibly can. Obviously, some of the security evaluation they're unable to publish, but a lot of it is in the public domain. Now, the implication in the UK, initially the markets reacted very negatively, but I can tell you that British Telecom has recently done a deal with, as the previous speaker said, the Nordic companies, and we've got a consolidation and a merger of two telco companies, which makes it appear as if the 5G rollout is returning to schedule. So I would say that after the announcement earlier this year, the market is adjusting incredibly quickly. And that, I think, is something to bear in mind, because what we're talking about here is a commercial market. So the markets are efficient. There is significant equity investment available worldwide for technology, and the markets will compensate and move and fill an opportunity. And that's really what's happening. So what I'd just like to talk about is where I see the risks around 5G. So 5G is more about low latency and coverage than it is about speed. And that means that the technology will be more pervasive. So 5G will have much greater implications. As previously mentioned, it will be part of critical national infrastructure. The impact of 4G not working is my video transmission to you may be interrupted. The implication of 5G not working could be that somebody dies. It is significantly different. Now, we've covered a lot of what I would call the known unknowns so far. So architecture plays a big part. And again, our cybersecurity center is trying to evaluate the best deployment of 5G. Is it in a greenfield structure, or is it on top of the 4G architecture? This debate will continue, and if you add in low-level satellite communication in the very near term, it will complicate the matter further. The market is over-consolidated. You know, some will. It's very difficult to have a diverse market because there are so few players in it. But ultimately, if we think about the commercial constraint, then how will security be paid for? If it's the lowest price proposition that sells, how do we incentivize our telecom providers to buy and provide for greater security if they're not rewarded by their consumers? Much has been said about the threat surface being greater. We've also got how we allocate spectrum. We haven't talked about the standards and the development of standards, the control and application of those for the devices that we connect. So there are lots of complicated known unknowns. But finally, I would just like to say that we should also consider the unknown unknowns. So the threat from 5G will be around the things that we cannot currently see. So that is around the extent to which 5G changes the social dynamic. So these are complex things, rather than complicated. Just a few examples of this. So my company works very much on user needs. At the moment, it is unclear what the user need is for 5G. Conceptually, there are lots of good ideas, but we are missing the killer application. For 4G, we had Netflix. At the moment, I can't see the equivalent for 5G. Good concepts, you know, Medicare and everything, but I'm yet to see the killer app. There will be a change to the market dynamic. So with 5G being available, then broadband will be less attractive. It will be unnecessary. I don't need fiber to my house. How will that change to the normal national telco provider, where maybe with impacts on the normal national telecom? Then how will that further impact the digital divide? Homeschooling with the pandemic has highlighted the difference between children that can connect to the internet with reliable connection and good IT, and those that are disadvantaged because they don't have an internet connection. We have a growing and significant digital divide in our society. I would like to mention briefly the internet. So as we upgrade what is connected to the internet, then the internet itself needs to be upgraded, the basic switching that the internet uses. And there are organizations that govern the internet. Internet governance is a fascinating topic. And if you research it and you find the organizations that actually govern how the internet operates, and look at the question of when we upgrade the fabric of the internet, how will that change? I think that all of these unknown unknowns and the greater impact on human behavior will have probably the bigger impact than some of the known unknowns that we can see today.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much. And I think you have opened a few windows that can be explored through the questions. I want to thank everybody for being so cooperative. You have been within the 7-8 minutes that we had given to each of you. But now I think I see that there are a lot of questions that are coming. If you want to renounce to your 3 minutes, we will pick up more questions. And I think this will make the debate much more alive. If you agree, I will ask the students to start to raise the hands, and they have sent questions through the chat, but now I will ask them to lift their hands, and we will start picking up questions. Okay. First question comes. Just one question. The first question comes from the social. Before it was said that the 5G is more vulnerable in the software than in the hardware. Can Andrea explain this particular issue?
Yes, of course. Well, the reason is apparently a paradox. It's much easier to analyze the software, and therefore it's much easier to find vulnerabilities in software. So to analyze hardware like we do in our company, it requires amazing amounts of not only skills, but also technologies. You have to open these integrated circuits, these chips. You have to look at them with electron microscopes, and you have to work really hard to understand and reverse engineer what was done. It takes a lot of money, time, and skills. But to analyze, reverse engineer, test, and find vulnerabilities in software is much, much easier. So the fact that 5G infrastructure will partly based on software-defined networks, at least at a certain layer of the infrastructure, opens up incredible opportunities for attackers. That's the reason why. It's cheaper and easier to analyze software, and there's a lot of software in this huge new infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. I read the second question that has to do, it was said that there was a mitigation approach. What does it mean? I think this question may be answered by everybody who has to say something about it. Christian, do you want to answer to this? The mitigation approach.
Could you please specify the question?
Well, during the discussion, it was told that there was in Europe a mitigation approach. That means that there are rules that have been taught to be able to regulate or also to control, to monitor every portion of the network and also the multiple vendors. Is this a compromise between a refuse of the certain technology and also the full acceptance?
Okay, thank you very much. So let me start with adding to something that Andrea Saparoli Manzoni said earlier. A mitigating approach is really difficult to realize, because when we are not able to track the supply chain, it is also difficult to mitigate all risk that actually originate from the supply chain. This is also true about the company, because the network constructions are often kept as a company secret. And this is also very much a problem, not only for policymakers, but also for researchers. The mitigation approach may also refer to what we have talked about, the EU toolbox for 5G security, which was released in January 2020. These are, however, voluntary guidelines which will, which need still further explication and harmonization. So what the approach is from the European Union, they concentrate mostly on urging the member states to adopt an appropriate multi-vendor approach, which is also quite difficult because we have an oligopoly here in which there are only very few vendors. Huawei is one, ZTE, Samsung, what do I forget? Samsung, Nokia, and Ericsson. So it's already quite limited what a multi-vendor strategy might be. A mitigation approach also means to strengthen security requirements for mobile network operators and to assess the risk profile of suppliers.
Okay, I have another question that is directed to Germano Dottori, and it has to do with the Italian position. We have changed our government in the last 2 years, and it seems that the Italian position towards the 5G coming from China has changed in a certain way. What is your opinion about it? You are mute. You have to put your microphone.
You're right. I am muted before. Yes, the less that I can tell about the Italian position about the 5G is that the current posture of the Italian government is very flexible, very ambiguous, because Italy is trying to appease the United States as its biggest and most important ally in the realm of security, with is trying to combine this appeasement with a certain will to keep the country engaged with China, because China is perceived by some as a business opportunity and as a source of investment, and also a potential grand market to export into. And there is also a very important thing to say, and is that the Italian political system as such is not a monolith, is very plural, and there are many across the aisle informal parties inside the Italian Parliament. China, there is another which is much more pro-Atlanticist, and so forth. So what I can say finally in a more precise way is that the position expressed so far by Italy is a sort of compromise, and there is also, or at least there were rumors about a possible split of the country in order to have Huawei in charge of the southern region of Italy and Nokia and Ericsson in charge of the northern and possibly the central regions of Italy. How technically it can be done, I really don't know, but I leave it to your fantasy. Imagine which political parties are supportive of a more pro-China stance and which ones are less pro. Let me add that in Italy there is also the OLC, and the OLC is a very big stakeholder into the Chinese policy of our country. So I think the picture has been in a way completed. It's not satisfying at all because it lacks of clarity, but as a matter of fact, is such.
Thank you very much. One question for Fabio Ruggia and one for Romeo Orlandi. For Fabio Ruggia, do you think that we will have a transatlantic alliance also in the 5G question? And for Romeo Orlandi, just 1 second, it says, do you think that COVID has weakened the position of China also in the 5G? We'll start with Fabio Ruggio, please.
Okay. Let's put it this way. The discussion on 5G has been going on at NATO. The idea is that you need to ensure and boost resilience of your ICT networks, because even though those networks may control, let's say, private endeavors, civil defense requires strong communication networks. And so it is a requirement of NATO that of ensuring the security and the reliability of our networks. Having said that, I guess the issue is much larger. It's an issue, it was said by Alexander at the very beginning, it's a question of maintaining and promoting the technological superiority that has been historically been associated with the Western dominance of the international system. As I said at the beginning, in order to make sure that this transatlantic community is able to mobilize the necessary forces and resources to ensure that they manage to fight and win this race for technological superiority, values are essential. We need to make sure that transactional policy, diplomacy, and the disregard for the multilateral efforts are put aside, because if the West want to prevail in this race, it needs to build and be, how can I say, be true to its own core values. And sometimes we have seen that even within the transatlantic community of values, it is sometimes difficult to maintain fair play and a common attachment to our common values.
Then, per favore, sorry, Romeo Orlandi, can you answer to the question about pandemic, COVID, China, and influence?
The narrative goes that the current narrative goes that China gave birth to the virus, but now was the first country to overcome the danger of the virus itself. Actually, it was in a good company with some other Asian countries. Among the many reasons for that, three are the majors: the political system, which you can translate in control of the population, a cultural reason, which is the traditional impulse to discipline and obedience. The third one is the availability of technology. Tracing people, it's common in Asia, and it was very helpful for fighting and defeating, it seems, the pandemics. So if the answer is, did technology and 5G help to fight the pandemics, the answer is evidently and obviously yes.
Okay, we have a question from Davide Bonisi in person. He prefers to do the question himself. Davide, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much to all the panelists. It was a really interesting debate. My question is actually for Germano Dottori, for Mr. Germano Dottori. And my question was related to the COVID-19 pandemic and the technological race, because we are seeing that US economy as well as the European economies are not coping so well with the COVID-19 pandemic, while the third trimester of the third quarter of the Chinese GDP resulted in a plus 4.9 with respect of the previous year. So China is coping economically in a better way. So my question is if this fact can represent an advantage in this technological race, if this time of COVID could be, a key time in this race, and then actually giving the primary role to China in this new infrastructure of 5G. Thank you so much.
Well, I think the two issues are not really interconnected but they interact. COVID-19, in my opinion, was the result of an accident. Probably it has been a problem inside the laboratory, but the Chinese were very efficient in approaching the whole issue very strategically. They imposed a tight lockdown on the region that was the source of the infection. But in my opinion, they made a very harmful decision against the rest of the world, because since their competitive position was damaged by the big failure in the province where Wuhan was, they prevented people from traveling from Wuhan to the rest of the country, and instead they allowed them to travel worldwide. Frankly speaking, if I were into the shoes of the Chinese politician and I was engaged in a power race worldwide, probably I will have done the same choice, in my opinion. They tried to export their problem in order to level the competitive ground worldwide. Then they were probably more efficient than our democratic system, because they don't have a public opinion politically able to express their concern. We will see what we do in the future in countries like Italy, where we have the problem now, a resurgent problem with establishing a tight control on the mobility of people and on the activity of people. In a country, in a totalitarian country like China, this has been much easier to do. So what can I do? The battle for the 5G is fought on a diplomatic level and on an economic level. China is trying to export this system through air diplomacy, through airway to make inroads inside the political systems of our democracies.
Germano, we still have 7 minutes. I think I would like to give 1 minute each of you, just 1 minute each of you to conclude, and just very brief statement. I will start with Andrea, and please, Andrea, stay in the minutes.
Sure. Well, I think there are 3 statements that I would like to make at this point after listening to all the very interesting points of view that were discussed today. The first is that the cyber balance of power in the world nowadays is based on a MAD approach, mutual assured destruction. So anyone can attack, but nobody can defend. So this is a very unusual situation where swords work very well and shields don't work almost at all. So we must keep this in mind. This is not truly a China versus the West issue. It's a general problem. And if we don't know the technologies that they are developing, then we will not be able to find their vulnerabilities. So I think there is really a paradox here. So if we ban their products, we won't be able to find the vulnerabilities. and we won't be able to defend and eventually to attack. The second thing I would like to say is that this cyber issue has historically developed over the past 30 years. Is a no trust problem. It's a zero trust problem. So we cannot say that one producer is better than another. In the devices made by those European vendors that were mentioned before, there are parts which are made in China. I'm 100% sure of it. So because of the supply chain, the complexities, the price, and so on and so on, the availability of enough numbers of these electronic components, and so on and so on. So they don't have their own supply chains yet. So this is not easy. Seriously, I think when we say it's a national security issue, we are right, but this is a global security issue.
I would stop you on this sentence. I read on my chat that Elena De Novellis from Italy student is having problem with the mic. I have a question for Mr. Campbell. He said that the 5G will change the social and market dynamic. So my question is about the accessibility of the network to all levels of society and how it will be reachable. Thank you. Colin.
Okay, thank you, Elena. This is an excellent question and is what we have been touching on as some of the wider challenges around here. So we already know that there is a digital divide between the city and the rural areas, between the young and the old, between the more technically able and those who aren't. And 5G will increase the digital divide. So I think that this is a really key question that, along with the sustainability of the internet, there are many commentators that will go as far to say that the internet, even before 5G, so even today, the internet is fracturing before our eyes. You know, the difference between people using the internet for good and for bad. And 5G will just exacerbate the splits and the challenges that we already have about the internet. So this question around the question you ask is exactly the right question, which is how will we enable all of society to benefit from the technology advances and not just a few.
Thank you very much. 1 minute for Romeo Orlandi. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. I see all over the world disillusionment for China. And sometimes this disillusionment turns to be animosity against China. I do not discuss if it is valid or not, true or not. My position is even with a strategic matter like the 5G, there should be space for negotiation. We should take into consideration that the best way to avoid disillusionment is to avoid illusion first. Now China is a major actor for any issue, protection, export, economic turnout. I believe there's sure space for negotiation, which doesn't mean to be weak. It means to be strong enough to accept that the role and the world now is multipolar.
Thank you. And I think we will go now to Fabio Rugge. 1 minute, Fabio.
Thank you, Giorgio. Well, just 2 points. The first, the internet that we know today is going to dramatically change in 10, 20 years. It's going to be something totally different. We had the chance to guide this process because our freedom will depend very much on how free the internet will be. It is therefore necessary that we try and have a political dialogue on the values that we want to preserve, on the strategies that we want to implement, on what we need to defend. And in this political dialogue, this political thinking is an essential component of what we need, if we want to be in the driving seat of the future that awaits us, we cannot just wait and see what happens and then react, because it's going to be too late.
Okay, thank you. 1 minute, Germano, no more than 1 minute. Thank you.
Just to draw a moment, yes, just a very, very short remark. I think the whole issue of the 5G is a strategic one. It is closely related to the global race for supremacy. I wonder just if something can change with the next presidential election in the United States, and especially if Biden should prevail over Trump, because in that case, I suppose that the way to treat China will undergo some change, especially change in the means employed to contain China, and not really in the aim, in the global aim the US will pursue relating to China. Just that.
Thank you. Last but not least, we give the last minutes to Christiane, the queen of cyber power, I would say.
Oh, thank you very much. So we heard the question, can a transatlantic 5G partnership be forged? I really hope so, but in my view, it should not only be transatlantic, it should be global. And this goes in the same direction as Dr. Orlandi and Mr. Campbell said. So my question is, how can we build this? We cannot build this by threat or blackmail. Neither Chinese nor US pressure have been successful. They did not result in allegiance from no partner or no big group of partners. So we need to find a truly cooperative approach, which is based on common denominators. And the best thing to mitigate the threats, which are stemming from actors which are seen as underly, is to include them and make them adhere to common rules, and make them enforce them to responsibly engage with each other. It's not easy, I know, but we see it in the 3GPP, in the ITU. It's possible to forge a common understanding. And this should also be done in a security sense and political sense.
Thank you, Christian. The last 30 seconds, I take them for myself to thank all of you for your participation, to thank Global Governance for hosting this event in their university. And I think that what we can take home is that we are facing a very complex problem, very complex situation. But you gave us a lot of food for thoughts, and I think that everybody has been enriched by the discussion. Thank you very much, and continue to follow us in the Diplomacy Festival that will last till the 30th of October. Thank you again, and have a nice evening.